course, we're joined now by Dr Levy Ndou, who is going to weigh in on some of the developments at the ANC conference. Dr Ndou, I was just thinking, as Nhlanhla Kgatlana was speaking, for those who are obviously not there, just watching it on television, there was a scene which one wished there could be a fly on the wall listening as the disruption of President Ramaphosa occurred. There was a heated discussion in the background of the national chairperson Gwede Mantashe, the KwaZulu-Natal leader Siboniso Ntuli, as well as the police minister Bheki Cele. And obviously it's a matter of speculation, but do you think that picture alone is a snapshot of what's likely to unfold over the next couple of days, as some analysts are already predicting?
Good evening, Tsepiso. Good evening to the viewers at home. I actually expected this kind of scenes to happen. Without any doubt, I expected them to come from KwaZulu-Natal. They have a history. When President Ramaphosa went to KwaZulu-Natal at the elective conference, similar things did happen in KwaZulu-Natal. And the provincial leadership had to intervene to tell the delegates not to continue with the disruptions. KwaZulu-Natal having nominated certain individuals and supporting them, and not supporting President Ramaphosa, it appears to me as if that they appear to have done calculations, and they are quite sure that the numbers don't appear to be favoring them. And they would actually do all they could in order to derail the conference, or to the least to collapse it. Unfortunately, it is in the hands of the delegates at the conference to make sure that the conference becomes a success.
And speaking of that calculation, Dr. Ndou, I'd like to stop you right there, because the scenes that we saw there of former President Jacob Zuma entering just when President Ramaphosa had already begun his address, insisting of sitting with the general delegates as opposed with the former presidents, and obviously the disruptions. Was that something that was carefully orchestrated, and to what end? And did it work to the effect that was expected?
Well, I think it did. The intention, in my view, was to draw attention and also to a certain extent to test the waters of the delegates, whether former President Zuma still enjoys support, or whether even if he might make an attempt to be elected, he might get support. If it was an exercise of seeking attention, it did work. If the intention was to disrupt the proceedings of conference, it did work. Maybe former President Zuma did not want to disrupt conference. Maybe he just came late. That's something that we're not quite sure about. But everybody else expected President Zuma, as a former president of the party, to join other members of the National Executive Committee to sit with them at the podium, because that is where he actually belongs. But the explanation as provided is that he came as a voting delegate sent by his branch, and that's why he actually opted to sit with other ordinary delegates. We might not be very sure what difference will that make, even if he had decided to sit with others on the podium.
All right, we'll get into the nuts and bolts of what was said in the political report in just a moment. Earlier on, President Ramaphosa saying decisions they take there at the conference will determine the direction of the movement. He says members and the people of South Africa expect the party to have the courage and honesty to recognize their shortcomings and resolve them.
The decisions we will take here will determine the future of our movement and, to a large extent, the direction that our country will take in years to come. we go into the 55th National Conference as an organization that is renewing and rebuilding itself. We have a new membership system as directed by the 54th National Conference to combat gatekeeping and the manipulation of our democratic process. More than 3,500 branches of our movement held the most democratic processes through the branch general meetings to discuss policies, to select delegates to this conference, and also to nominate their preferred leaders. These are major steps that have taken place in renewing our organization and ensuring principled unity. This 55th conference takes place at a time when the movement and the country are facing enormous challenges. Members of the ANC who selected all of us as delegates to represent them here expect us to demonstrate the necessary political consciousness and resolve to confront and overcome the challenges that our people face.
All right, President Cyril Ramaphosa speaking earlier on. Our resident analyst, Dr. Levy Ndou, joined us, just reflecting on some of what President Ramaphosa said earlier on when he was trying to quell the disruption. He mentioned that there were guests who were in attendance and that he thinks that delegates ought to show the requisite decorum. But he also mentioned liberation struggle movements who had their representatives there. And I wondered from where they were sitting, is this a movie that they'd see before in their own countries? Were there lessons that we missed as South Africa as the oldest liberation movement on the continent?
In an event where there is tense contestations, even with political parties in other parts of the world, it does happen. It might actually be happening at a very minimal level. And I think what the ANC and other political parties have to start doing is to develop ways and means in which, even though there is contestation, tense contestations for that matter, they should actually not drift members of the ANC apart. The unfortunate part is that from 2007, and fast forward to 2017, when there is this kind of tense contestations in the ANC, you no longer observe the level of comradeship. What happens beyond a conference? It's factions which culminates into enmity. In the ANC, you have members of the same party who no longer communicate with each other, who no longer treat each other as comrades of the same party. They are now enemies. And the biggest challenge, which Ramaphosa actually outlined in his speech, is that in the main, it is not about ideological contestation. It is about access to power in the party, which guarantees individuals to have power or positions in the state and access resources. And that is an area, in my view, that the ANC has to carefully come up with better strategies to deal with what is actually unfolding in the ANC now. Otherwise, the conference of this magnitude that is taking place would have the potential to write the obituary of the ANC, or the delegates of the ANC should rise and say, we need to start to do things differently in order to take the ANC back to unity and its old glory days.
I mean, Dr. Ndou, pundits such as yourselves have been warning for years now of an impending implosion of the ANC. And I want to look back to 1995, just on the issue of unity, when it wrote in a document that the unity of movement includes or involves a social contract between the individual member and the collective, in terms of which individual members surrender their personal sovereignty in order to pursue a common purpose. And if there are expectations or substance coming out of this conference, has that document basically been trampled on? Is it in the ashes? Do people even remember it?
The question remains whether members of the ANC still believe in surrendering their personal sovereignty to the political party. And it takes us back to the reasons why people would join political parties, knowing that they're doing it voluntarily, and also knowing that they are going to surrender a lot of their rights. And because the ANC has not been able to deal with factionalism, to deal with these divisions within its ranks, you always find a situation where the ANC these days, it's unable to speak with one voice. Even though they'll go to meetings, you will still get other members saying a different story, contrary to what other members of the ANC
But
are
in
saying.
brief, what would you say is the source of that?
The source of that is the inability to manage factionalism and divisions, but in the main, discipline within the party. The ANC generally has lost its own discipline. If it was in any other organization, you don't need to write regulations, the do's and don'ts of delegates who are attending a conference. You don't remind a member of the party that you don't have to disrupt a conference.
Okay.
Because a disciplined member of the party would know that this is incorrect, I'm not supposed to do so. But it can happen in the ANC because it is dominated by ill discipline, and the ANC does not act on ill-disciplined members.
All right, Dr. Levy Ndou, political analyst, just sharing his views on what happened earlier on.